Awesome. Well, hey, thanks, Ben. I really appreciate it. And everybody, good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Robert Roman, and I'm really excited to be here with you today and share just, about 20 minutes or so. And I know 2020 has been a very interesting year for many of us. And my subject of today is about living your best life. We know that's the theme of this expo. And I do believe in empowerment through education, specifically financial education. My background is I was a U.S. Air Force avionics mechanic for 6 years of my life. And about 20 years ago, I almost by accident found myself getting into the financial industry. My passion was really about educating people because I found myself in a situation where I didn't really understand what I was going through financially and kind of where I was and if I was on track or off track. And so I really want to share some ideas with you today, some statistics, kind of some strategies, what's going on, and really some resources that might be available to help you regardless of where you are along your financial journey towards financial independence. So why don't we get started? So, we talk about retirement realities. I know retirement for all of us means a lot. I know it means a lot of different things depending on where you are in your life. And I think COVID-19 has really changed the dynamic, changed the landscape per se in a lot of these areas. And we look at some of the challenges that many of us are facing, regardless of your age group. One of them is potential for stock market volatility. We saw earlier this year, and I'm going to share a slide here in a moment about what's going on in the market. Should that be a concern for us? We're about to go through an election cycle. I should say we're in an election cycle. It's an interesting time, and that is going to affect many of us when it comes to our retirement in terms of how we're saving. Are we making money? Are we losing money? And we really need to be aware of that. Another area that we look at and we see a lot of families have a lot of challenges with is the rising cost of healthcare. The rising cost of what's called long-term care, something that many people don't even understand. Isn't that my Medicare? Isn't that covered? And we're going to get into that because it's really affecting people because the rising costs of this, one of the number one reasons for bankruptcy in this country right now is really due to medical expenses. Somebody gets sick and they don't have the proper plan in place. Another area that we're going to briefly talk about is a lack of estate planning. Many families, they may say, I don't need to do that, or I've already taken care of it. But a lot of times there's some lack here because it's not complete. It may not be accurate. It may not be updated. And so there's a real lack in this space. Again, this is a reality that many of us are facing for us to protect our future and our family. And another one here is the impact of losing a spouse in retirement, something that none of us really want to think about. But being in the industry as long as I have, it's a sad reality. But in terms of having a financial plan and education and strategies in place can really help us along our financial journey. And the one thing that I've noticed along my personal journey, as we sit here in quote unquote, the richest country in the world, I find more families are more confused than ever before about financial matters. If they're young, whether it's college savings, and if they're on the other end, it's retirement in these other areas. And so we're going to spend some time today talking about it. So let's look at the first one, which is the stock market volatility. I really want to share an updated slide, and this is updated as of August 31st of 2020. So I don't know when you're going to be watching this, but that is when this slide was made. And I want to point out a few things here because it looks pretty interesting if you ask me. You'll notice on the left-hand side, it shows the market back in 1996 for a span of several years went up about 106%. And it was followed by a drop of 49%. Makes my heart beat a little bit faster when I think about that. We were then followed soon thereafter by a rise of 101%, shortly thereafter of a decline of 57%. And here's the reality that a lot of us in this country have very short memory of 2008, when the average American lost nearly 40% of their savings. If we look at 2020, COVID-19, March 23rd of this year, the stock market bottomed out at a loss of 34%. And here's why I think that's important for us. Many people, when that happens, they panic. They don't understand. They say, get me out of this. And they realize the gain. And so what we want to point out is right after that, the market has obviously come back to an all-time high of positive, 56, 58%, depending on when you look at it. And so the thing that we want people to realize is, are you in a position in your life when you could handle the potential for loss? I do not know what the next 30, 60, 90 days look like, the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But I do know if I look at this picture, there's probably some turbulence ahead just based on historical data. And avoiding the loss can be just as important as realizing the gain. And so sometimes, depending on where you are in your life, again, this is why I believe education is so important, because we often say, no, the stock market's making me money. I don't want to make any changes right now, Rob. And I say, I understand. And that's not even what I'm advising. But the point is, if things go south, many families are not properly prepared or have the time to recover. And I want to elaborate a little bit more on that. This is the truth about down markets. And so as you see on the screen here, if we experience a 10% loss in our portfolio, it requires a gain of 11% just to get back to where you started. And as that loss gets bigger, the return needed becomes larger and larger. So, for example, let's look at 40% loss. That's pretty scary to think about, but it would require a 67% gain just to get back to where you started. I don't know about you, but that could be concerning for some people, because if I'm, 50 years old, 60 years old, 65, whatever, age bracket I might be in, I potentially may not have the amount of time to have that proper return to make up for it. So investors really need to be educated and protect themselves from the big losses. Again, we don't know what the future holds. We need to have some strategies and education in place. And so we look at this subject of retirement. And again, I think everybody has their own definition of it. A few things that I would point out, and it says you're going to need about 70% of your pre-retirement income to live on in retirement. There's an old traditional, illustration that they would call the three-legged stool, and it would be symbolized by a chair with three legs. And those three legs would represent, number one, Social Security. Number two, a pension. Interesting. Number three, personal savings. We look at most people in North America, if they have a pension, that is wonderful, but many of the pensions are not properly funded, and there's a lot of concern around those pensions. But what about the families that do not have a pension in place? We look at Social Security as only replacing approximately 40% of our income. So many people, they're not properly preparing for this. The average 401k retirement account balance for a 60 to 69-year-old is only $195,000. And don't get me wrong, that's a lot of money. I don't want to downplay that amount of money. But if I'm 69 years old, there could be some concerns, meaning, well, what if I live another 25, 30 years potentially? There's a longevity problem that all of us are facing. So we look at our people on track. We need to have the proper education. I believe we need to have the proper guidance to get to the proper solutions, because there are literally thousands of financial products on the marketplace. And as an airplane mechanic background, I used to ask myself and ask my father, well, how do you know which one to buy, Dad? How do you know which company? There's hundreds of these companies, thousands of these different products. And he says, you've got to get proper education. And so a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And we've got to really make a better impact on American families to get more on track for retirement. I want to shift gears and talk about a subject called long-term care. Something that I've experienced firsthand in my life. And what is long-term care? Because sometimes it's very confusing for people. They say, well, I'm on Medicare. I think that's covered. What is long-term care? And I really want to read the slide here because I copied and pasted from Medicare.gov because I want you to hear it from what they say it is, okay? It says long-term care is a range of services and help with basic personal tasks of everyday life and bathing, like dressing, using the bathroom. These, you guys, are sometimes referred to as the activities of daily living. So imagine you're in a situation where you have an accident, you have an illness, and maybe you can't take care of those things. A lot of times people say, well, isn't my health care or my Medicare going to cover that? According to Medicare.gov, Medicare does not cover long-term care. You pay 100% for those non-covered costs. And so the reason that I believe this is so important for us to have proper education in place is, imagine you go into a situation of your life where you need these services and you haven't had the plan in place. The financial impact can be devastating, as I'm about to share with you some of the current numbers of what the annual cost of these things are. So we're going to look at some facts and we're going to look at some data and some of the numbers. We look at medical bills. The average retiree will spend an average of $122,000 on medical care from the age of 70 to the end of their life. That's a lot of money because it factors in all of the out-of-pocket things we have to deal with. On the flip side, we look at long-term care, and the statistical data will say 70% of people in this country are going to be in a period of their life where they need some form of long-term care. And when we look at the data, again, it's staggering, up to $390,000 for almost a 4-year stay. So if someone is in retirement and they have to cover all of these costs, this can be a financial landmine per se and really wreck someone's retirement. Beyond 100 days, again, Medicare does not cover anything for long-term care. So it's an important point for us to understand that Medicare is going to cover the first 100 days. So there is some blessing in that. But many people say, well, what happens after that? At the end of the day, it's on us as people to have a plan in place and to be properly informed of how do we do it? Because there's a lot of different products on the marketplace. And again, my role today is to give you some ideas and concepts and not really to get into different products. But there are ways to address these issues. There's an old quote by Benjamin Franklin, and it says, most people don't plan to fail, they just fail to plan. And I think that's true if we really look at a lot of areas of our life. And one of them is the long-term care, because it's almost like we say, well, that's not going to happen to me. And again, when we look at the numbers, it can be quite staggering, especially if you look at full-time nursing care of, an average median cost of $100,000 per year. And so depending on where you live and where you reside, this can range quite drastically. But on the low end of, let's say, $18,720 per year, how does a family pay for that if they don't have the means for that? And so I have a lot of personal stories of experiencing people going through health problems. And one lady in particular having almost a $12,000 a month expense. And so it's something for us an important plan for us to have in place in terms of our financial well-being as we go into the future. We look at the other area of estate planning. And what is an estate? And this is something that everybody needs to have. And there's some basic documents that we really recommend every American family have in place. This is extremely important, you guys. One of them, the very first one, is a basic will. Many of you probably already have that in place, but many people, I find what they say when I bring up a will or any sort of estate plan, they say, oh, you know what, Rob? I've been meaning to get to that. And here we sit, the first day of the first quarter of 2020, the fourth quarter, I should say, of 2020, and many people are still dragging their feet on this. And so a will is something that identifies who you want your property to go to. What do you wish to have happen to those things when you're no longer around? And some people, again, they say they'll get to it in the future. I just experienced a loss of a good friend of mine, unfortunately, about a month ago. And the reality of sometimes when that stuff's not in place, it can be a real headache for the family. The other area is what's called the financial power of attorney. If you become in the situation where you're maybe incapacitated in a hospital, you can't make decisions on your own, you may need to have someone have the authority to sign on your behalf. And if you don't have one of these in place, it can really create a lot of financial challenges at some of the hardest moments of our life. So it's really important that we all have these in place. The other one is what's called advanced healthcare directives. You can spell out exactly what you wish to have happen rather than put that on your family for them to have to decide in the event you were in a situation like that in the hospital. And the other one is what's called a HIPAA authorization, a HIPAA release. Obviously, because of health and privacy reasons, we advise all families to have these in place to protect themselves and to begin the processing of a basic estate plan. Estate planning can obviously range into the other realm of building, complicated trusts and things like that, which obviously I would recommend you, have a conversation with a tax advisor to make sure you're following the proper guidance on that. So we look at some famous estates. They call famous estate failures, ironically. Prince and Aretha Franklin, two people that most of us we've heard of these people. And we look at the value of their estate, in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and neither of these individuals, as successful as they were, as well off as they were, as high class as many people would make them out to be, neither of them had a plan in place. And we witnessed this happening over and over and over again. And so again, there's an old saying that proper preparation prevents poor performance. And so I really believe this is something that's important for people. A lot of people say, well, what is an estate? I don't really understand that terminology. Rob, I don't have a lot of assets. I may not have an estate. An estate is effectively everything you own minus what you owe. So it's pretty simple to look at. So many of us can sit down on a blank sheet of paper and we say, well, actually, maybe I do have an estate here. So it's really important that we get properly educated and we have the proper guidance, have a plan in place to take care of these things. We look at the fourth area here of the challenges of potentially losing a spouse later on in life, later on in retirement. Again, not a subject that anybody wants to spend a lot of time talking about. However, there's a lot of peace of mind that comes from having a plan, from knowing, hey, there's not going to be any sort of tornado come through here and wreck my financial well-being when I'm going through a very emotional time in my life. One of those areas to consider is the fact that your income and your expenses will change upon this situation. A lot of confusion out there when it comes to the social security system in this country. And so imagine me and my spouse, we're retired, we're living our life, and one of us were to pass away. Often, the surviving spouse is under the impression that they're going to continue to receive both of those Social Security checks. And I'm here to tell you that's not true. The lower of the two, the lesser of the two, goes to what I call to the house. And the family keeps the higher of the two. And so a lot of people, they're not prepared for the loss of that Social Security check because they thought it was a guarantee. And that is actually not the way it works, ladies and gentlemen. One of the other areas that we educate families on is planning for the final expenses. We look at the rising costs of funerals, and some of these services and things can become extremely costly. Depending on what the individual wants, we really recommend a family have a plan in place, again, to minimize the burden of the family having to make those sort of decisions for that individual. And the last thing we like to talk about is what's called planning ahead. There are some things that exist that, again, a lot of people don't know about. Just like technology has changed many of our lives, there are some things that exist in North America called funeral concierge services. I ask a lot of individuals, sir, ma'am, have you ever planned a funeral? And it's something that, again, none of us really want to think about. And I think, I don't ever want to go through that. And so a lot of us need to understand that there are services that exist in this country that can eliminate those burdens from our family. One other area in that aspect, make sure you're an organized individual. If you were not to come home tonight, does your spouse know where everything is? Do they know the policy numbers, the passwords, the phone numbers? With technology, many of us using our cell phones nowadays, a lot of times our spouse doesn't even know we maybe have an account set up. And so I really advise that we stay organized, almost with a set of instructions for your family. If you were no longer around, you can leave a little note for your wife and kids and say, hey, here's where everything's at. And so it's just really important, peace of mind for our family. And so again, we believe in the power of education. And really, what is it that our firm is all about? And really, one of the reasons I'm here is I deeply believe that people should understand their situation, and they should understand what they own, and they should understand what they buy. There's a saying out there that education is measured by the ability to apply the information. And some people say, okay, I've heard that before. But I keep looking at the statistics and I say, well, then why is the average American not going to successfully be able to retire with dignity? And so we look at, there's a big lack in society in various areas of the financial realm. One of the things that we're very passionate about is providing free resources for the community to help families learn about how money works. And what we do is we have workshops. We have materials, we have training, we have in-person events, we have online, on-demand things that are really going 24 hours a day that are 100% free for the communities. And we're doing this all across the United States and Canada. And we're really passionate about that because we feel like families need a better path for their future. And we have a team of licensed financial professionals that are here to help you. And so if someone has a very specific situation and they say, Rob, well, you mentioned, setting up a trust, and I know you're not an attorney. We have a team of experts in all of these areas, licensed experts with well over 100 years of experience. And so it's powerful that we can focus on education before people are actually doing anything with their money. One of the things that we are a part of is we are supporting a national campaign for financial literacy. That campaign began in the year 2015, and the initial goal was to bring financial education to 1 million families in North America by the end of 2020. And I'm proud to tell you that that campaign has fulfilled that goal of bringing education to over 1 million families. And the new goal is to bring financial literacy to 30 million people around North America by the year 2030. And I'm proud to say that. And so we believe in the schools should be educated, the young people should be educated, but specifically the senior generation needs proper financial education. So financial security for everyone. We offer access to a leading platform of helping people achieve their financial goals. And some people say, well, help me understand this a little bit better. We need to get protected for life insurance, long-term care insurance, Medicare insurance, car insurance. We think about all of the different insurances that all of us are going to interact with. And so we feel that people should have a proper plan in place with proper guidance before they buy any sort of products so they can make the right choice for their future. The education, like I mentioned, again, it's not something some people say, well, I don't want to take a course. We would love to share free resources and give you access to books and workbooks and some materials, again, so people can understand a little bit more about their situation. We talk about investments and retirement planning. Again, our key that we feel to successful retirement planning is something that you have a clear plan in place. A lot of times we look at it and we say, you know what, I don't know what it's going to take to retire. I don't know if I'm going to be on track with my Social Security in my situation. And so we really believe in what's called a financial checkup. A financial checkup is something that I feel that for some reason the United States has not implemented for most people, even though we see the dentist every 6 months or whatnot. We see a lot of families financially. They set up a strategy, they have a plan, and they never really look at it. Many people don't even look at their statements anymore. And so we look at the various areas of life insurance, home and auto insurance, IRAs, mutual funds, different forms of investments, even down to debt management and helping people get out of debt. And so the fact of the matter is, it's a crazy jungle of financial instruments out there. And if we don't know how they work and how the companies function, it can be a challenge for a lot of people. So we're really trying to help people navigate that path. And so I really want to take a moment and say thank you for the opportunity to be here and spend a few minutes and speak with you on this subject. I know it's a subject that is important to so many of our financial futures. And again, my name is Robert Roman, and we're here to help. And we've set up a special website, www.azseniors.info, for us to be able to share all of this information with you, for you to get access to community resources. If you have any questions, I've put my personal contact information on the screen. Feel free to call me, email me, text me, anything you may need. And so again, I'm excited to be here at this moment in history with you. As we go through some of the worst financial challenges of our life. Many of us are going through many challenges. And so I want to say thank you for the time. God bless you. And I'll turn it back to you, Ben.